Hi, and welcome to the FX Podcast. I'm John Montgomery. In this episode, our focus is once again on the recent Superman film, this time with members of the team from Framestore. Our guests are CG Supervisor Kevin Sears and Animation Supervisor Loic Mireault. The guys focus on several aspects of their work, including Krypto the Dog, which required a careful balance between realistic canine behavior and superhero abilities, the crystalline Fortress of Solitude and the animation of the Superman robots, and some really cool insights into the pioneering use of Gaussian Splats to create the holographic Kryptonian parents. So let's go ahead and join the conversation now with the guys.
So guys, thanks so much for joining us. Kevin, when did you guys first get involved with the project? How early did you sort of get to see the script or whatever?
Yes, I was able to kind of get involved quite early in October of 2023. We had a great relationship on Guardians of the Galaxy 3 with James Gunn and our experience working on that, specifically the Cosmo dog asset in that film. So I think as we were finishing Guardians of the Galaxy 3 in post-production, the script was being written by James, as far as I understand. And we were told he kind of was thinking of us specifically about how to do this Krypto character. So I think that was really something all throughout the summer of 2023 and into October when I joined the show, we started working on Krypto. So
excellent. Well, Krypto is probably the most remarkably popular character in the film, with exceptionally good response from audiences. But also, actually, I heard a huge uptake in people adopting dogs, which has got to be validation, especially for the animation team, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the popularity of the asset, especially something that we develop in Montreal. The asset Krypto have been developed by our asset team here in Montreal, and then share with the other vendor that was Weta and ILM. But like even early in the animation process, it have been Montreal that develop from scratch the personality of the asset, and obviously with the direction of James Gunn, but still the early blocking have been shared with the other vendor, so they can kind of get the same vibe that we established here in Montreal.
So did you do, so obviously the Krypto dog features in the trailer, it features like at the very beginning of the film, but like which dog, I mean, obviously you were lead on that, but which sequences were yours and which weren't yours? For example, did you do when he was inside the Pocket Universe? Was that you or not?
No, that was Weta actually that did inside the Pocket Universe.
Yeah, because Weta did all of that Pocket Universe stuff then, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And Framestore, it's mainly every time it's with these Fortress of Solitude, that's Framestore. So very early in the movie.
So it'd be safe to say you were doing the happy dog.
Yeah, definitely. And let's say Weta did mainly the flying dog and the more active, let's say this way. But then, yeah, so the happy dog, crazy dog at the beginning of the movie, that's us. But also we did few parts here and there. Example, in the T-Craft, when he's going like on Louis' legs in the T-Craft, that was us. And here and there on the farm, also in the farm with the parents, that was Framestore. And also when, let's say, Krypto meet Lex Luthor at the end of the movie, that was us too.
Excellent. So let's discuss the dog model, which was based, I believe, on actually the director's James Gunn's actual dog, right? Which I haven't had the name here somewhere, right? Is it Uzo? Is that right? Uzo or something?
Yeah, I think it's pronounced Ozu. I'm not
Uzu.
sure.
I'm sorry. You're probably right. Yep. So yeah, how literally was it modeled on? Like, was it just sort of that breed of dog, or was it like quite literally you got to meet his dog and?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't get to meet Ozu, but that was one of the first things that when I joined the show that we were provided a photogrammetry scan of Ozu, and it's really nice because James Gunn's sitting there right next to Ozu, kind of coaching him like a director would. And so we got some nice poses of Ozu itself, which is quite a small terrier type dog. And we knew that it was kind of the first starting points before we even considered exactly what Krypto was going to look like. We wanted to make sure that we had the essence of the dog's facial performances and the general spirit And I think that was one of the things we heard about in the script, that James wrote it thinking about what Ozu could be like if he had superpowers and just destroying everything that he could come in contact with. So we actually built Ozu as a digital dog just so we had a representation of that. We groomed it and shaded it and got the patterns of the facial breakup and everything. And so we knew that we had a great starting point to then extrapolate that onto a much larger kind of collie type of dog, a snow dog. So that was really great because we've been able to capture, even though the proportions are different on a larger dog, the way the eyes and the nose are feeling, and some of the subtle darkening around the face is all inspired from Ozu.
So when you're doing a character like this in a film like this, which is clearly like high on entertainment and high on like character kind of notes, was there a temptation to make the dog a little more? I mean, you've done Rocket, which is obviously a talking animal. You've done loads of animals, right? So there's got to be a line there between, well, this is a dog that absolutely can't talk and is completely real, and this is a dog that we can get a bit more expression into because the plot requires the dog to emote just through facial expressions. Where did you end up in that kind of line of realism versus being able to sort of maybe anthropomorphize him a little?
But I know, like, since day one, James Gunn was clear of what he had in mind. He didn't want a dog that has like this human intelligence. Like if you take Cosmo from Guardian of the Galaxy, Cosmo, even if it feels very realistic, he still have this very human mind. And he didn't want to go there with Krypto. It needs to be a dog. So imagine a dog that has superpower, basically. So we need to feel that he's, let's say, dumb as a dog. And especially this dog is pretty dumb. But again, like we didn't want to feel any, let's say, like super like human intelligence. That's for sure. That was the base of like the foundation of the character there.
So when you're getting dog expressions, they have to be dog expressions, not kind
Absolutely.
of like,
So we base everything on references. So James Gunn shared with us tons of video reference of his actual dog. So I know Framestore very early in the process asked him like, "Do you have footage of your dog?" And obviously, like any dog owner, he got tons of footage of his dog. And a lot of things that is interesting is the way Ozu, his dog, is behaving with James Gunn, the way he bites his ankle, things like that. Very subtle things in terms of behaving that James also wanted to see in Krypto, and he was clear with that. And so we started to look the. I don't know how many minutes that we have, but a lot of footage, that's for sure. At least 30 minutes of footage, that's for sure. Even maybe an hour of just Ozu behaving in his house, being crazy, jumping on the couch and playing with the cat, playing with James Gunn running in his backyard. So it was to evaluate, okay, how we can make Krypto Ozu, basically. That was the goal there. When James Gunn was reviewing our animation, the goal was for him to see his dog. So that's why every time we're sending like a block anim, we were adding references of Ozu, doing the same kind of action of Krypto, or at least as much as possible.
One of the things I think after we built the digital version of Ozu, we had those kind of clips that Loic's referring to. There was my favorite clip with this cat of James sitting on a patio and kind of swiping at Ozu as he ran around and terrorized this cat, and the cat just kind of doesn't care and is getting him out of the way. And so we took that and we were like, okay, that's the frenetic energy of Ozu. And now, as we're building the larger dog, can we get that kind of speed and that frenetic activity onto a larger dog? And what would that look like? And it's even kind of more charming and funny to me that you have a larger dog that's scared of this cat. And so we replaced Ozu in that same iPhone footage with Krypto. And that, I think that was one of the first things James saw and immediately could like recognize that behavior because he remembers filming it himself. So that was really great. And we took it even a step further by taking those clips and match moving them and creating camera compensation so that the larger dog could fit to the face of Ozu, so we could wipe and show we're matching all these details on Ozu's hero face area.
Well, that sounds amazing. Hey, the other aspect about that, though, is also animating the cape, right? Because that on a dog would not behave in a particularly heroic fashion, I would imagine. It would easily fall to the side.
Yes, absolutely. And we've done our fair share of capes with James. There's a warlock character in Guardians of the Galaxy that had a cape, and we using that the clip of Ozu on the patio. When we put the Krypto version in there, there was a little bit of a question like, are we going to have this cape 100% all the time in the film? And so yeah, they agreed, looking at that test, that we were going to have the cape. And so to do that, we knew that was one of the first challenges, that this cape would quite quickly fall to the side. And so just to keep the kind of comic book inspirations and those hero poses that we wanted to capture, we created constraints in our CFX creature effects simulations so that we could subtly keep it on his back in some areas instead of letting it naturally fly away.
Yeah, it was definitely a challenge for the CFX team, especially since, a superhero and his cape is kind of a character by itself. Superman in all the comic, all the poses, the cape, it makes sense in the composition of every single image. So obviously, Krypto, we didn't necessarily push it as far in terms of like every shot the cape has to kind of have like this perfect composition, because obviously we have to stick to realistic physics, what is not the case necessarily in a comic book. But still, we needed to make sure that the cape has, this kind of superhero vibe to it.
You want him to look kind of heroic, but the biggest difference, the reason I mentioned it, is that if I'm looking at a character standing there as a biped Superman type character, the cape is going to drape down because it's going to fall behind him, because that's what it does, right? But in a dog, you want it to kind of go horizontal, which is not something that it would naturally drape to, and yet it's obviously easy to draw it that way, and it does look good that way. But you have to get it to a level, I guess, where the audience buys that it's looking great and doesn't think about why it's going sideways.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe Kevin also can talk to you more about that, but we went through a couple of iterations also of how the cape should look like, all the wrinkles, how it needs to feel right. And it wasn't easy to get the cape asset approved for Krypto. So
I want to switch gears if I can and talk about the Fortress of Solitude, because quite frankly, one of my favorite locations in the whole film. I loved how it looked. I loved the sort of, I guess, homage to the 78 sort of Superman look, but also it was fresh, and it had these marvelous robots in it, which I thought was like insanely great, and a bunch of other stuff which we're going to get to. But let's just start with the exterior and the kind of the notion of it. Presumably you got stuff from art department as to what it was going to look like, or did that get developed more in-house?
We did receive quite a bit of art department references, concepts, and even they shared an amazing kind of Unreal fly-through across this Antarctic set, because we knew it was going to be filmed on location, not a set, in Norway, Svalbard. So there's this basin kind of valley where they were going to film plates of actors, Superman being dragged in the snow, which the actor really did, which was pretty great reference. And nothing on set was built for the fortress, but there was a stage built of the exterior door with some resin crystals that looked really nice. And so we used that as our foundation of the starting point for the exterior itself. But the Unreal file kind of flew over the tundra into the front door, into the interior, and showed the set design of the interior at that time. And that was done before the set was even finished building. So for the exterior itself, we had quite a bit of creative freedom to then take that LiDAR of the partial set build, and we suggested in our own biz dev the way the crystals lay out would kind of flourish around the door, how big these were going to be, and then as we had the camera pull further back, getting this kind of iconic asymmetry design for the way it was being presented. And so yeah, that's how we started with that.
What did you have to work with in terms of the interior set? So obviously there's a couple of times we see the interior, but like physically what was built, how much did you have to do set extension?
Yes, we did quite a bit of set extension. We actually had many more shots in the interior than we did the exterior. And I was really glad I wasn't able to be on the set myself, but our VFX suit was, and everybody was reporting back how very impressed they were. We had a great collaboration and a call with the set designer. So I was geeking out, looking at all the different parts of the set to see, what parts we were going to extend and what was intended over here. And the area where there's kind of a computer that the robots manipulate, and behind that there was several curtains set up to block light and imply how large the scale was going to be, but there was no resins in that direction. So we knew that was kind of a hero section, also because of the story, Superman sitting in a chair, that wall of crystals was going to animate and let sunlight come through it. So we tackled that and also designed how large those crystals were going to be all throughout the set. So there's about, I would say, the lower half of the set at a human height level is all plate, and then everything above that is CG in all directions.
So the characteristics of the resin worked enough that you could leave that, you didn't have to like replace it. Like in other words, I mean, sometimes it's really great to have that as reference, but you actually, to get it the way you want it, you have to end up replacing that. Or did you just, the optical characteristics of the resin is what you ended up with?
It is what we ended up with. And that was one of the things we noticed, that like the exterior view of the fortress, we were able to put layers of snow and kind of give it a different dynamic look. But we knew we were going to match the look of the resin crystals because they had so much complexity with the actors reflecting and moving through them. And so we actually treated our crystals in the interior to match more of the set so that they had that aesthetic. And yeah.
So I mentioned that LiDARing was really significant because if you're going to introduce robots and a bunch of digital characters, you obviously have to reflect those in the surfaces and account for like what was going on there.
Yes, absolutely. And the Superman robots, there was an amazing Legacy Studios puppet on set, and that was there in many shots that we tracked. And because it's so reflective, it is basically a chrome ball. It was reflecting everything, and so it added a challenge of reflecting the fortress interior itself and cleaning up all of those kind of interactions that we had. So many of the robots, for performance reasons, were replaced, but also just creatively to do the crew cleanup, we replaced them to get the reflections.
And also the correct set extension through the reflection.
Yeah, I can imagine. Hey, talk to me about the styling of the actual animation of the robots. Like, what was because a lot of the performance gives us the sort of the personality of the robots. I mean, there's some dialogue, but it's sort of a performance-driven characterization, really, for the robots.
Yeah, we totally base ourselves on the actual animatronic on set. James loved the way they were moving, and it was clear that its
articulation was fast enough. Like it actually moved quickly enough that you could sort of mirror that.
Yeah, like for the animatronic, every time we see for sure the full body. Never they shoot it this way because it was not able to walk. But then there's a lot of shots where it was upper body in camera, and we object track and recreate full CG the character, even if we had the actual shot. Like James was happy with the performance. He was like, I like that. So, but still internally, like here, like we had to still replace it, but we copy and kept the same animation from the original footage. So to stay consistent, we had to make sure that even when we had other shot that was full CG, the robot there, example number 12, or the other robots during the sequence, were not they were not shoot. Like it was full CG since the beginning, but we still had to maintain the same style of animation and the same way they moved to keep consistency.
Okay, so the animation sort of character of them is being set by onset, but just clarify for me, as we were just discussing, you're going to have all these horrible reflections, as Kevin mentioned, and reflections of things that aren't there yet, right? That are needed to be added in. So are there like pixel wise, did you have to replace or overlay on that performance to get, like, say number 12 is there and it's doing exactly what the director wants, but you still probably just couldn't use that, right? Because it would be reflecting all the wrong things and not exactly the right characteristics. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. But it is a full CG replacement in those regards because of that reason, and also because the timing of the ADR, their mouth illuminates and has this nice fall off. We wanted to match that. But in the spirit of, as Loic's saying, matching it, if it was in camera, we match moved it and didn't intend to change the performance. And in some cases, the legacy prop was incredible. It had small imperfections about how the metal was made, and so we matched all of those details to make it feel as real as possible, because we wanted to honor the legacy, no pun intended, of what they had done.
Yeah, so I guess
we couldn't tell basically even internally, like when it was the CG and the actual plate. It was very well done. We matched 1-to-1, and in a lot of these shots, the animation is exactly the same. We didn't change anything. It was object track, and then in animation, small cleanup pass just to make sure. But then it's really like the same performance as the footage.
So the puppeteers are basically providing the character basis upon which you're building. I'm just wondering, like, there are some like semi-dark bits at the end, like the sort of screwdriver to the head is one thing that upset me greatly. Was all of that? Was there like a much variation? Like, you built on this puppeteering like basis, but did you then take it in different directions? And because, like, how did you find the final performances?
I mean, this specific shot, we used the footage. There was someone on set. There was the actual number 4 that was the robot on set, the rig, and there was someone that was actually moving his arm to stab his own head, and
so we'll blame them for the sadistic behavior.
Exactly. We still had to paint out the actor moving the robot, but then for the arm itself, I'll say we changed a little bit the performance, but we kept the same spirit. So even if the robot is full CG at the end, the arm, we changed a little bit of performance, but barely.
So I was wondering, Kevin, if we can discuss like the comping side of things. So what renderer are you using? And if we just take those two elements we've talked about so far, the dog, which is furry and hence very diffuse in not reflecting, but white in a white background. And then on the other side, you've got incredibly reflective metallic surfaces. Both of these propose different compositing problems. But so just give me the mechanics behind how it went.
Yeah, absolutely. Framestore has our proprietary renderer called Freak, which is based on Arnold, and it is what we've been using for many years now. And it's quite well, because we're proud of being a creature studio. It's quite good at managing the complexity of fur, but it does all the things, including crystals, that are extremely reflective and refractive. And so one of the challenges of the Krypto, it's specifically being a white dog on a white snow with a white sky, was that we have very subtle layers of like yellow staining throughout the fur to make it feel as believable as possible, like a snow dog would. But we were encouraging that scene to make the dog as white as we could as well, to kind of feel part of that world and not look necessarily dirty because of those patterns that we got from Ozu or some other references. So we did inject a lot of rays into the fur, and the way that white fur is actually more expensive to render than any other tinted fur in our renderer, because it's physically calculating those values in the spectrum, and so it became quite expensive to see all those white bounces and interactions with each other. And in some cases, we tinted certain parts of the dog's skin whiter than we normally would have, just to feel this kind of global response to what was happening. And then, yeah, the Crystal Palace, or the Fortress, I should say, was quite a bit of a rendering challenge. There's only about 12 shots of the exterior of the fortress in the film, but the interior provided the same challenge, and there's over 120 of those shots. And what we did there is we determined with our kind of concepts in VizDev that the director did want to see very kind of clean crystals, if you will. So we wanted to not feel they're foggy or kind of disrupted or too much like ice when you get too much breakup on those. And so we knew we were going to have to see one crystal refracting many of its neighbors around it. And so to do that, we kind of pre-processed a refraction pass so that we could limit the amount of bounces between the crystals. And then we injected that back into the interior of the crystals as a projection, and then rendered many more rays for the reflection bounces so that we can get proper interiors in there. And all the crystals have effects geometry that's shattered planes that are inside of them to give more complexity in them as well. So yeah, our renderer had quite a challenge, and I think we want to set some records at Framestore for the amount of render time at 4K.
Lots of bounces. Okay, but the thing that we've been discussing the renderer, and we're discussing how you render in a traditional 3D sense those interior shots of the fortress. But the thing that I'm incredibly excited about is how you, I don't know if I even should use the word render, produced the footage that is Superman's parents. Can we discuss that?
Yes, absolutely. I was quite excited to work on this challenge. The production came to us last summer in 2024, and we knew that inside the interior fortress was going to be this component of Superman's message, and it's quite a big story component. And we wanted to, we didn't at the time know exactly how many instances of those clusters of the parent's message would be performing. We also knew that we wanted the message to be unstable in a way, that it was, the story point is that it's corrupted. And so we wanted it to feel like it was jittering or glitching. And we came up with all these words like futzing and all these terms of how it could be feeling three-dimensional. And we didn't want it to look like a 2D kind of treatment. And so for all those reasons, the client VFX tube, Steph's already, and us were exploring options with the neural radiance fields, which are an exciting new technology that's been coming around for the last couple of years. And even last year, it was incredible to see every couple of weeks a new technology, a new improvement of that, a new application to it. And using Gaussian Splats as one of the forms of producing that really seemed like there was a few vendors that were exploring those ideas. And so we honed in on just outside of London, a couple hours, is a city called Ipswich. And there is a company called Infinite Realities. And the two people that we worked with there, Henry and Lee, were really influential in the entire process. They have a service where they were solving from every direction a performance of a human, and in looking like video quality footage, we could then solve that and produce CG camera moves around that volume after the fact. So we explored many tests with them throughout the summer of last year. They were quite accommodating to all sorts of requests and providing a sample of data packages and tips and tricks with this new emerging tech. And
so can I just ask that? So obviously, I totally agree with you. Like 3D Gaussian Splats and incredibly interesting, but also in the same conversation must have come up nerfs, right? Did you like do a comparative, like sort of, well, this could be a nerf solution or it could be a splat solution? And if you did go one way or the other, why was that?
I think we didn't explore any other nerf capability other than the Gaussian Splat, and the 4D Gaussian Splat was something that Infinite Realities was providing. So we looked at their digi-double capabilities, and we decided with production, we didn't want this hero message to feel like a digital character in any way, even if it could be solved in certain ways. And so we decided to just wholeheartedly embrace this option that they were giving us, which is a 4D Gaussian Splat over time. So
So just to be clear about this, like the technique is basically sampling a bunch of points in a volumetric space, and then, as the word splat implies, you kind of spread out from that so that it doesn't look like a point cloud, but it's still a not necessarily temporally cohesive process, because if I'm understanding it correctly, you would have done a sample per frame effectively, right? And then unless, which I'm assuming you didn't do, polygonalize that, there's no necessarily need to provide a temporal cohesion on the mesh unless you wanted to reanimate it or change it.
Correct. You're absolutely right. Yeah. There's no polygonal textures, lighting, anything like that, but it is being completely solved per frame as unique volume. So the way the Gaussian splats are working, obviously, is not just spherical points, they're ellipsoid points. And the amount of camera coverage between one point to the next using the Gaussian method is extrapolating those values to each other, and it's a very dense data set.
It's like you've got a point cloud and you spread out from each point in an ellipsoid to actually connect up to the other points, and you no longer have any holes. But in that process where you've got no temporal consistency and you're basically in the point cloud that isn't then polygonalized into what would be a normal renderer, you can't change stuff much. Like if the director says, hey, just take this guy's hand and lift it up, there is no hand object. There is no mesh that's underlying that. So you presumably just had to really go with what they got in camera.
Yes, absolutely. And that's, you're absolutely right. That's why we tested so much, because we did a test with the cinematographer, a DP lighting test of a costume test. Then Infinite Realities tested their own version of that using their camera arrays and mapping in HDR to their lights and photographing that again. So they were doing a pre-light test before we even went to the day of shooting. And we knew that the video footage was going to be not a high dynamic range. And so we wanted to get the exposure of these costumes right. We didn't know exactly what the material of the costumes was going to look like either until really the day of shooting. It's about 192 cameras in their setup, and they're shooting at 24 frames a second. And it was basically in a 2-minute take performance. It took over 4 or 5 days for the machine learning to calculate all those points and get a temporal solve that felt cohesive enough. And once we got through that process, we actually ran another version that was even longer to get a little bit more sampling and a little bit more machine time to analyze those points.
So for somebody listening, they might say, well, why the heck did you bother doing that? Like, is it just to make it look like a particular stylistic fashion? Hey, couldn't you have like synthesized that with either a 2D technique or even just a style transfer learning? But while it has no temporal cohesion, you can also virtualize the camera now, right? Because you don't have a camera position, you have a volume.
Absolutely. If you think like in Star Wars, when R2-D2 is projecting Princess Leia, and that's a camera filming her lined up to match the one where R2-D2 is on set. Typical ways of doing match move and motion control between these characters would have been something that would have been done in the past. But the reasons we went through this process are we didn't want to pre-plan all those camera moves for all the many instances in the Fortress. We didn't want cameras moving past the actors' faces because we knew with these wide angle lenses of the movie, the cameras would have to be quite close to where they were and distracting into the one take performance. We also knew that because the message was going to be unstable, we didn't want it to be strictly video feed that we were doing 2D manipulation on. And so we got to a point where after the data set was given to us, we were testing ways to rasterize that and visualize it. And we also were able to take that into Houdini and take all those points and partition them off and separate them into sections. So now we could take the actor's head and rotate it and move it over here and retain all the lighting information, all the transport, all the points. And so when you see them in the film glitching and rotating, they are still that performance with these offsets that we're doing. So we wrote that back out and rasterized that version as well.
Wow, that's really interesting for the glitches. But let me ask you another question. So like I've now got, or you've got an on-set camera that's moving past where this should be, but you're not using, as in a 3D concept, a virtual 3D camera to render the Gaussian splat in terms of optical characteristics such as lens distortion or anything else like that. So is it now that you, of course, it's not polygonalized, but at some point you obviously get a rasterized 2D output from the Gaussian splat. Is that then taken into new to try to be bended and sort of placed into the live action camera's characteristics, or were you mucking around with the Gaussian splat somehow before you got it into that flat rasterization to make it fit the set?
The lighting conditions on the characters were luckily enough that we had one consistent lighting. And so we knew that the way they were going to be backlit, they were always going to be kind of fitting in certain angles around crystals. So we used that as a motivation for how they were lit. And so that allowed us, and we were very clear that we were not going to be able to relight them. And so, as you said, we couldn't reanimate their performance in any way. We wanted
but how did you comp them in? Like, what was, so like if it's a wide angle lens,
right?
Do you, sorry, go on.
Yeah, it was a typical workflow. Even though the result is a 2D image into compositing, we had maps and treatments and comp to blend them in, opacity maps. So it's true that like the 3D aspect of it is lost in that way, that it's more of a traditional grading and opacity workflow on the edges to make them feel like transparent holograms. And but the real 3D side of it comes together when you see them moving and animating that way. Or the extreme kind of camera moves where we're flying right past their face that we couldn't have done any other way. In those cases, we were realizing we could compensate the focal length to make their faces feel framed a little bit better, which we couldn't have done if we had all baked that in with motion control.
So you were doing the lens choice in the output from the Gaussian splat, but then, so that would be like, hey, I want a wide angle interpretation of the virtualized camera going past their heads. But then that still comes out as effectively a 2D patch, which then gets put into a 3D freak rendered, wall inside a camera match moved 3D set that was practical. Yes. I know that sounds really complicated, but it is like it's awesome that you've done it, but actually it's not as simple as it sounds until you start breaking it down, I think.
Yes, and the results in this are quite unique, I think, because the application used to use 4D animated performances, I think, can escalate and become more widespread. When I was on set for the performance capture with Bradley Cooper, and we were kind of talking about how it's like theater in the round, that even though in this particular scene they're performing straight ahead, but we could put that camera around their heads and film them from the back. And so they were giving a performance. We weren't using filters to make them look different. We weren't doing anything on them. It was exactly their performance, just refilmed in digital after the fact. So that was really the way I think we embraced it and explained it, that it was it was almost like just a way of capturing a human performance that we could film in any direction.
Yeah, remarkable. So if I can swing back to animation now for a second, Lockie, with the engineer that comes into the Fortress of Solitude. So that posed a whole lot of interesting animation problems, not least of which is like, clearly there's going to be some actors on set, but there's an enormous number of things that the engineer can do with her nanite technology. Can you talk to me about that process and how you approached the animation of her in that Fortress of Solitude attack sequence?
Yeah, it was definitely a very complex sequence in terms of animation point of view. Very early in the process, we received footage with stunt actor performing the actual choreography of the fight. So internally, we can start, okay, what will be the challenge with, example, the robot rigs? Because we know that the robot on set that they built for real had a lot of limitation because of the way the blades, the shoulder blades, for example, were kind of having some sort of like shape that maybe the robot cannot lift the shoulder higher than a certain level. But then in a fighting context, you need to have like full, like no limits, basically, like a human, especially when we're looking at the stunt actor's performance of like jumping, punching. And so we had to make sure that our rig doesn't have the same limit as the animatronic on set. that was the first step. So by receiving this footage, we were able to start deving and posing the robots in extreme poses to make sure that our rig will hold basically when we'll start the actual animation. And then we receive the actual plate. All the stunt actor also were there with the actress. We had to paint them out and replace them full CG. We still asked the tracking department to give us a first pass match move, basically, so we could start with something in animation, so using the stunt actors. But then obviously we polish and we try to, even if the movement were way more dynamic than the beginning of the sequence of the movie, sorry, when the robot were extremely robotic, let's say this way. But then in fighting we had to make them way more dynamic, quicker and fluid, let's say this way, to match the performance. But again, we should try as much as we could to keep this robotic feeling, that's for sure. But
And
yeah, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, the engineer herself, when she's attacking the robots, you've also, of course, got like not the total destruction, but the destruction of the robots. Like, I mean, at one point she throws out kind of spinning blades that sweep past Lex's face and attack them. Like that, was that like a previs fed kind of choreography, or were you working that out as you went along?
Yeah, clearly we received a post-viz first that like James Gunn pre-approved in terms of like energy feeding, how many robots would get killed and things like that. And they base this post-viz on the same footage received with the stunt actors and also very early footage. But then it was a lot of back and forth between animation rigging and FX department, and even CFX, I would say, for the cape of the robots, because also that's another challenge for the blade to get through the robots and the cape also. That was two different departments, because the cape is CFX, but then the robot destruction is FX. And also a bit of animation that was, I would say, kind of leading like the motion or driving the main motion of the robot, but the little pieces and how, and the, if an arm get cut, it was mainly FX that was driving that. So we started in animation to develop the main action as early as blocking. The rigging department then picked what we did and started to establish the main cut of the robot. So we have different rig variant with all these different cuts, if it was the head or the shoulder or the legs or the upper body, and all these maybe 15 different cuts that was happening in that specific shot. And then rigging provide us different variant for that. So then animation was able to kind of like in kind of a one frame switch, let's say this way, to switch to this new variant. So example, there was this robot coming towards camera running, and then the blade was cutting his neck. Then we were able to, okay, now this new rig take over the rest of the animation. So FX was like starting with this and then adding more effects and also driving even the bigger part, like so the arms and the head was also driven by effects at the end to get the right physics. And
yeah, it was it's a difficult problem because also you've got the fundamental, well, I don't know, was the plate photography, or did you use a CG environment to
no, it
build
was a
on top of?
plate. It was a plate. Obviously, I mean, the plate, there is always a plate extension in every single shot in the Fortress, especially for like all the ceiling and everything. But the set was very well made, and I would say the majority of the set was plate at the end. Maybe Kevin, you can correct me, but in this specific shot of all the robot destruction, we still use a lot of the plate. But on top of that, there was
I guess I was just wondering, because
extension.
sometimes when you're doing animation blocking, like obviously they're shooting something on set, but they don't have bits of robot flying off to sort of frame the shot on. So sometimes, just for all the right reasons, you want to reframe the cinematographer's decisions or the choices, because
No, we stick to the camera actually in this shot.
Yeah, that's
Sometimes. You go
yeah,
ahead,
that's
Kevin.
one thing I wanted to mention is that, yeah, the even before we saw the post viz or the previs, what was in camera was filmed, rehearsed with stunt performers. So if the engineer's fighting two robots side by side, there's guys in gray suits she's holding onto and pushing. And in some cases, that long shot where Luther's walking and the blades are spinning by his face, they shot that with and without, two different rehearsed versions with the stunt actors. So we knew really what was going to happen. Every time you see the engineer, we're not deciding her animation after the fact. She's body tracked 100% to match that performance. And it's her body that's fully CG to have that interaction with the robots.
So we have a bit of leverage, drop her head a little bit, because at the end we're only keeping her head. So if we needed her head to be slightly to the left, we could do that. But it's very minimal, the change we did. And this shot is so long, and also to try to keep the dead moment, let's say this way, if even there is barely any dead moment in this specific shot, because it's very dynamic, but still we need to make sure that the blade choreography was filling all the, let's say, empty moment, to always make it consistent. And also all the choreography of these blades also makes sense throughout the full
I mean,
length of the shot.
it's a really good sequence. Actually, I said on a separate podcast that I get to hate Lex so much in this. Not that I hate the actor or the performance or anything to do. I actually just hate the character, and I particularly hated them having a go at the robots, which just seemed like just downright mean. So at an emotional level, you guys were like totally nailing it in making me hate the characters for what they were doing, and I think it was like a really good sequence. Though, did you have much trouble, like Kevin, in terms of like getting the final look when all was said and done with this sort of nano-ID technology of and the extensions effectively from the engineers as she metamorphosizes into various weapons?
Yeah, her powers are kind of unlimited in terms of creative brief, and we had probably the most amount of concept art from DC and Warner Brothers for this character in the film. So there was so many options we could go through. They didn't want it to feel like a Terminator, like a T-1000 liquid behavior. They wanted the nanite behavior to essentially be her entire skin or suit can do any kind of materialization needed. And so we took the digital double that we built that had kind of layers of fabric on set that were really impressive, like kind of holographic costume design. And we used that as our inspiration for, okay, this three-dimensional cubic version of her body. So we in Houdini replaced her with these primitives that we could transform into pyramids or spikes and cubes. And that allowed us to then extend her body and kind of create wave functions across her surface so that we could then reveal a weapon or a blade forming out of cubes into this idea that she's always computing something, and her body's thinking. So as she fights the robots, she spikes up and gets more active. And when she goes to the computer to hijack it, she kind of grows these tendrils like Groot in the Guardians, and she's infecting that and having all those cubes pull back energy back into her body. So we did quite a bit of object tracking just to retain as much of that performance on set, but also just making her body feel alive in those moments was really important.
Yeah, I think as I often feel like I should comment, like the camera tracking and the paint out guys or people really do you guys a great service, don't they, in providing the basis of the clean platform upon which for you to produce your animation.
Yes, absolutely. We have a really great Mumbai site that does a lot of this work, and we work closely with them. And when you're animating something just in camera space, in the past you can get away with a lot of things, but when you're having to integrate such a complex scene, we're really scrutinizing that from every direction as well. And they're character animators themselves in that regard.
Yeah, but it's worth to mention also that like we didn't have any puppet though on set for Krypto that needed to be removed. Like I know the paint team have been extremely useful in this Fortress sequence, but then for everything outside of Fortress with Krypto there were no puppet there. That was also a challenge to make sure the framing was feeling natural and good with Krypto in there. Because even if we received a very well done pose viz for the show, giving us the main beat energy that James was expecting from Krypto, we still had to make sure that the actual asset that clearly had a different scale than what they had in poses, because they didn't know what was the actual model. They didn't made the same process in terms of asset development
Yeah.
that we did. And
especially as he's so frenetic, right? Like that's another thing. Like you've got to provide room for your animators to have space for him to be so active in.
And it was purely keyframe animation too, so no motion capture or anything like that for the dog. So we need to make sure that the actual energy that was established in the poses that was still there. So it was really by looking at tons of references from Ozu, like I already mentioned, but also finding the right reference on YouTube, for example. Okay, so in the poses, the dog is doing this and that type of action, but in the poses, it's always very rough animation because they do that very fast. So, okay, so if the jump is jumping in the poses, we need to make sure that the jump now feels real, like a real dog will jump, and not how we think it will jump, because then it will feel uncanny. Because it's so easy for a dog to feel uncanny, so we need to stick to proper dog performance all the time.
Well, if I was talking to you about a normal sequence of a normal dog, I should say, I'd be like, and of course, you'd want to make sure it seems like it's got the right gravity so that it's sitting down properly. But here you've got a dog that actually doesn't have to stay on the ground, right? So I guess in some senses, you're wanting to make it seem like it's weighted and heavy and sitting down into the environment. But in other senses, it's not required to do that.
Yeah, definitely. But I would say on that aspect, Framestore was a bit easier in terms of we didn't have a lot of these flying sequence that Weta did, for example. That for sure for them, I would be curious what kind of challenge they face with that. But
even if he's just jumping around somebody's leg, right?
Yeah.
Like you could animate it such that he like jumps and doesn't immediately come down with weight, because we know he can fly, right? It's not a
there is this moment like at the beginning of the movie, he's jumping over Superman and this kind of things, and it's for sure that was a big challenge because it needs to feel natural. That's the thing. Even if it's a big jump, like if we take Hulk, for example, every time he's jumping in this movie, we still feel that you need to push hard to get that high. And we need to feel this power, even if it doesn't make sense. It's totally realistic, but you still believe that it's possible. You believe that. And so it was the same process. Okay, when the job is jumping, the way we move the legs, and we still need to feel that it was just a dog, but he's able to jump 10 meters in the air if you want. So yeah, it was a big kind of, it was a lot of back and forth, just internally, not with the client, just internally with the animators all the time. Okay, what is the best way to make Krypto jumps? So it was definitely a hard development process, but at the end, I think it turned up pretty well.
Well, it's obviously a great project for you guys. I mean, as I said, the 3D Gaussian Splats, the Fortress of Solitude, and Krypto, the most popular dog on film at the moment. Thanks so much for taking time to talk to us about it. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Well, thanks, guys, for taking the time to chat with us. I really enjoyed hearing about the intricacies of animation, as well as the super cool use of Gaussian Splats that made it to the big screen. Now, in case you missed our previous episode covering Superman with Weta FX Guy Williams, be sure to check that out on YouTube or on the FX Guide website. Well, that's it for this episode. For Mike Seymour, I'm John Montgomery. Thanks for listening to or watching this FX podcast.